Hello, fellow innovators. This is Patrick Emmons.
And this is Shelli Nelson.
Welcome to the Innovation and the Digital Enterprise Podcast, where we interview successful visionaries and leaders, giving you an insight into how they drive and support innovation within their organizations.
Today, we're welcoming Kayne Grau to the show. Kayne is a CEO at Uptake, a Chicago-based industrial AI and analytics company. He is responsible for evolving their product suite, enhancing deployment and customer success, and optimizing company operations. Previously, Kayne served in various senior executive roles with CAR Global, the acquirer of Driven, which was a company he co-founded and served as CEO until April 2017. Prior to CAR, Kayne led various management roles within music dealers, apartments.com, cars.com, and Allstate. Kayne also sits on various advisory boards, mentors local startups, and invests in technology-based companies in Chicago and Dallas. Welcome to the show, Kayne.
Thanks, Shelli. And thanks, Patrick, for having me.
Kayne, if you don't mind, please share with our listeners a little bit about Uptake.
Yeah, so Uptake, founded 7 years ago by Brad Keywell, very well known for other reputable companies in Chicago like Echo Logistics, Groupon, and many others. And, you know, really sort of the premise behind Uptake and what we're doing is, as we all know, machines within heavy industries are generating more data than ever. And so you have these sensors that are creating endless data in countless and disconnected places. And so what we do is we take that data to help heavy industries solve their toughest challenges through insight into performance and basically predictive maintenance of those machines. And so we serve industries like oil and gas, energy, utilities, transportation, manufacturing, and the government. And we're a worldwide entity and the market leader right now in industrial analytics.
Pretty cool stuff. It seems like a perfect, Midwestern company, right? Tying together what's going to happen in the future with all of the heavy industry that's always been the backbone of so much of our economies.
Absolutely. And we're all reading about supply chain concerns and logistic concerns and everything that's happening. And so the dependency of Uptake and the accuracy of our data and our predictive models are front and center for many, many companies right now, and specifically within transportation, where we have to get goods from point A to point B and ensuring that the trucks are safe and that they can actually move the goods with minimal issues.
Pretty cool stuff. I know you've been with Uptake 5, 6, 7 years, about a year and a half?
Yeah, about a year and a half. I've known Brad for about 10 years. And prior to this, we were the co-founders of Driven. And essentially Driven, much like if you look at Eric Kowalski and Brad Keywell's sort of portfolio, is bringing data, humans, and relevant technology together. I mean, that's really sort of their bread and butter playbook. And it was no different when we created Driven, which was this idea of walking into a used car dealership and helping the general manager or the used salesman to understand profitability of the lot and what they should be stocking and what they should ultimately be disposing. And we actually took it a step farther to actually pull inventory out of markets where there was maybe too much or too little, or, a combination of both. And we could balance markets out using data. So we would do everything from buy the car to selling the car, to transporting the car, and to even moving money from dealership to dealership. And so we did that for about 24 months, and then we eventually was acquired by CAR Global.
Very cool. One of the concepts that we talked about before was this concept around, you've been in a space that's constantly evolving, right? There's just growing, seeking new opportunities, jumping on those opportunities, taking chaos and turning it into something a little bit more predictable. This concept of a crash course MBA is something you mentioned in a podcast I saw you in before. So I really I'd love for you to share what that means to you, how that impacts the way that you view the world.
Yeah. The crash course MBA comes from what I think is really sort of identified my career, I guess, for all intents and purposes. So in 97, I was very fortunate to team up with a former executive that I had worked for previously. And we started a company there were a couple of co-founders prior to me joining, but we started a company called etoys.com in Santa Monica. And we eventually became the world's largest toy store. And over that 4-year period, although I was really sort of in charge of technology, I was actually working in a warehouse. I was doing real estate deals. I was doing pretty much anything to keep the company moving forward, and way in over my head pretty much every day over that 4-year period. And although the company was a disaster of sorts, we ended up going bankrupt and fire selling the asset. I would never, ever trade the 4 years for anything, because as I would tell everybody, that was the crash course MBA. It's where I learned business. It's where I learned failure. It's where I learned scalability and predictability. And honestly, it's where I worked, and it's where I still hold in highest regard of working with a high performance team. There was no such thing as quit, and there was no such thing as giving up. And if you look at that 4-year period that we were in business, I mean, what we were delivering and how we were delivering it still amazes me to this day. And so, the crash course MBA term comes from sort of that era. And at the end of that era, I said to myself, like, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. I want to build brands. I want to build companies. I want to potentially fail again if that's what it takes, eventually have a success. But it was such an amazing part of my career.
If you could go back, I'm just curious, what advice would you give yourself
in that time period?
Yeah, prior to that experience.
And we could do a whole nother podcast on that one. So I'll give you a couple quick ones. Number one is I moved out and I was married for about 6 months upon taking that job, and I was divorced 6 months later, and having worked 100-hour weeks from literally minute one until year 4, and
wow.
Never went home for a holiday. Very rarely talked to my parents or friends. It was just work. Lived on a couch in my office, showered in the office, ate in the office, pretty much didn't leave the office unless I was in a warehouse. And, what I tell everybody is life is way too short to ever work like that. And I was actually just talking to Peter Wilkins about this and explaining that, you need harmony in your life. You need balance in your life. And just going back and looking at that whole time frame is just being so consumed with work and not having any other identity outside of that. I would never, ever do that again. I mean, to the point now where it is literally like my priorities in life are my wife, my kids, and my work. And it's in that order, and it's very specific to that order. But it took those 4 years to learn that. And that's what I'd go back and probably reevaluate.
That's pretty interesting. And I think specifically during times like now, right? This is really important information about finding balance, because I think it's easy to kind of slip into an unhealthy norm of like, I think we see it. There's a lot of people working a lot more hours, not sleeping on couches and, like showering and, bathing every morning in some sink in a warehouse, but it's less pernicious, but I think it's as impactful of like, we're not making time to go for walks. We're not making time to get out of the house. We're not making time to spend, maybe too much TV, too much on the phone, those kinds of things. It's really important stuff. I did want to seize on that concept of learning through failing. It is hard for a lot of people to, in 97, 98, the universe is a whole different place than it is now. The concept, like Amazon was a good idea in 97, right? It's not this world domination tool that it was. It had bad branding. It was a terrible website, and they sold books that somebody manually packaged. So to think about like that from a 97 chaos standpoint and like learning, you went hard, and like the idea that like, the world was so different then. Right.
It was a gold. It was the modern. I mean, let's call it back then the modern day. It was the modern day gold rush, right? I mean, it was like, I was literally living in New Jersey and moving to the West Coast to build this company, and so it was, we can go back to that century, and I was, and we all thought back then. I mean, if you really think of like what we were doing in 1997 and the introduction of really internet and e-commerce and everything that was sort of happening, we all thought we were going to be millionaires, right? And so failure, because there were so many millionaires and it was happening every day, you were just seeing another company IPOing. And And even our IPO, what I was worth on paper and then what I was worth after year 4 and going through bankruptcy looked very, very different. And psychologically, that was really hard to get through. That was some years of therapy for, full transparency. And so failure comes in a lot of different forms and flavors, and it's not one size fits all. And I failed in smaller companies and just things I've tried on my own. But I will tell you is that every failure is truly a learning. And it sounds cliche and it sounds, everybody always says that, but that is the truth. It is that I felt like that those 4 years would never, ever be wasted, because what I had learned and what I had built and some of the things that I had solved that were an utter disaster, I got put back in that position again. And the learnings were strong enough and they were ingrained in my memory well enough to say, we're avoiding this. And I could counsel senior leadership at Allstate for all intents and purposes to say, we're not doing this. This is what this will lead to. And here I am in a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate or a multi-billion-dollar insurance company at that point, saying to a CEO, to Tom Wilson, like, don't do this. This is a really, really bad idea. I wouldn't have been able to do that had I not gone through eToys, or I had not gone through a couple other companies after that.
I agree 100%. I think there's the idea that, like, look, you're just taking a lot of the lessons. You're accelerating the learning, right?
Yeah.
When you're doing stuff like that, it's like, well, do you want to get to this point of knowledge and wisdom in 2 decades, or do you want to do it in 5 years? Right.
Yep. Absolutely.
You're taking the punches, right? Like, if you want to get anywhere in life, you're going to take the punches. Do you want to take them quickly?
Put it in.
Right. Exactly.
Yep.
We can either get there fast or slow. Your choice. And I think that is part of the challenge when, a lot of people are thinking about entrepreneurship, or they're thinking about being agent of change in their organization. They see a lot of that, going to get punched in the face, for want of a better term. But one of the things I always try and encourage, especially with founders, is like, if you look at all the things that are getting in your way, you're right, it looks overwhelming, right? But if you just turn it to the side a little bit, you can see that, like, they're not all coming at one time, right?
Absolutely.
I use this metaphor of like a running back's job is to make the first guy miss. That's it, right? Because the world changes after you make that first guy miss, right?
Absolutely.
You don't know who's going to get blocked. You don't know what's going to get changed. But I think a lot of people stop themselves from taking some of these big risks because they could see all of the punches, but not realizing they're not coming today, right? One might be like a year off. So,
yeah, and absolutely. And I think a lot of it, what I've learned, having been a founder now a couple different times, and is that you just can't also do it all on your own. And I think you're at a different place in your life. If you're much younger and you're starting a company and you just don't have the experience nor the failures, or, you think you got to do it all on your own. And then I think you get later in life and you're like, wow, like, I actually need to rely on that person, or I actually need to rely on that partner, and I can't do it all on my own. And again, I think that just comes from, like we've been talking about, the theme of just learning.
Yeah. It's a great point, because I do think when you're younger, you think like, I'm going to white knuckle this whole thing. Right.
Right. Yep. And I'm going to work the hours. I'm going to work the 100 hours to get it done by brute force. Right. And that doesn't work.
Yeah. It doesn't survive. Yeah. One of the other great concepts we talked about before is being authentic as a leader, right? So moving into that, like, I want to be seen as this visionary. I want to be seen as this wizard, right? Realizing that that's not really a survivable goal, right? Like, the idea being, look, I need to be a leader. I have to create influence with other people. I got to set vision. I got to set direction. I've got to do these things, as a CEO, as a founder, one of the concepts you brought up was that authentic. So how do you use that? Why is that important to you and what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I think what really means to me to be authentic is I go back to a lot of I've been blessed, like, over 25 years and the number of really, really good leaders that I've just worked for, and that I still talk to many of them to this day, and in the sense of mentorship. And this idea that I've always said is, like, leaders are always under construction. If you think you've nailed leadership and you've learned it all, like, you got a long, long ways to go. And it's every day you got to be under construction, and you got to be listening, and you got to be adapting, and you got to just, and the world's changing so fast, right? Like, the way I led 10 years ago has zero relevancy in the way I lead today. And so I think it's the people that I've worked for and the characteristics that I've appreciated, that I've molded myself around, but also kept myself true to values that are really important to me, that might not have been important to them, but very, very important to me. And I had a pretty strict upbringing with my parents and the way we treated people and our manners. And a lot of that is just instilled in like the way I treat employees and the way, like, I will never ask an employee to do something I wouldn't do for myself. I just believe that in my heart of hearts. So a lot of the when I say authentic, it's, you want to learn from the best, but you also want to put it in a way that it adapts and it doesn't look like you're trying to copy something. And then a real-time example that's very, very recent is working for Brad. Brad is an amazing, amazing visionary. Brad moves at 100 miles an hour. Some people can keep up with him, some people can't. And the talk that he and I had when I decided to come into Uptake and really sort of take over the day-to-day is I was very truthful. And I said, listen, I don't want to be you, right? I want to be me. And what I want to do is I actually want to have like my spin on Uptake. And I want to be able to do what I want to do with Uptake, but I want to be able to use everything that you've taken, all the goodness from the last 6 years, and apply that into what we're doing. And I think like that struck a chord with him, in a positive way, that struck a chord with him because, again, like I needed to be me. If I was going to be him, this would have been an utter disaster. And because it just wouldn't have been real. I don't think people would have bought in. And the first thing I did was I started surrounding myself with people better than me. And honestly, people that helped scale businesses like where we need to be as a SaaS company, things that I didn't have experience in, and said, listen, I'm hiring you to do this. Like my COO, Linda Bartman, she runs the day to day. I have zero qualms I have all the respect in the world for her to basically say she runs the day to day. I'm trying to stay strategic. I'm trying to stay visionary. I'm trying to move the company forward. She is the operator of the company for all intents and purposes. And so that's what I mean by authentic is getting true with yourself. And again, I think I wouldn't have been able to say this at all when I was, 25 and probably coming out of college in my second job or third job. But at some point, I think you get comfortable in your own skin to be able to say, I'm not good at that. I need to go hire for that. Or the way I like this idea of that the people that I hire are people that I ultimately would work for in many circumstances. Like I would report to that person if I'm hiring you on the executive leadership team. And so that's what I think of when I think of being authentic. And I guess I would say one other thing that's really important too. There's a lot of people that say they believe in culture. There's a lot of people that say they want the best working environment possible for the employees. And then I watch them, I don't want to stereotype or anything, but in some certain circumstances, I see they do the polar opposite. And I only put my feet on the floor in the morning to go to work because I love the people I work for. I am wired as a culture cultivator, a culture creator. And I just believe, and the day I took over Uptake, I said to the employees, I said, you're the number one priority. It's not the customer. The customer is a priority, but the employee is the number one priority, because if I believe that the employee is happy and our employee satisfaction is great, the customer will always get taken care of. And I've just always dumped a lot of my effort goes into making sure that we have a really, really strong culture, and more than ever because of what we just talked about. I mean, Zoom is tough. It's really, really tough to stay in touch with these people, with the workforce.
That's a great point. I think it's that authenticity. You've got to really be doubling down on it now, right? Like you've got to find ways to sweat it out, to bleed it out, so that people can see it, feel it, touch it. Right? It used to be one thing. There was that human pheromone concept. You'd be around each other, and there would be some of that would be picked up from, just being around each other. But now you've got to be very deliberate about it, right? You've got to be very clear.
Well, yeah. I mean, like when we were building Driven, and every Friday afternoon at 3:00, it was basically like beers out, pens down. Let's celebrate a couple accomplishments and let's talk about the new product feature that's coming out. And everybody would get super excited. And, it was like the best day of the week, and it was every week. And we just felt so good about, and now like you got to be really conscious by that. And what you got to do is like a leader, you've got to put the time in, and you got to call the person. You don't rely on Slack and text and email. I like pick up the phone and call the person and say, I can't believe how great of a job you just did this week. And do you understand the impact you made on this, and this, or, oh my God, like what a great sale. We've been trying to get in this account forever. It's such a great job. Like that human contact right now is so, so important because we're living 12 inches away from a screen. And in many circumstances, I think everybody's multitasking, and it's like, you don't get that drop by at the desk or that happy hour or whatever it might be. Like that, those days it's really changed.
Shelli, you got some thoughts or question?
No, it's so interesting. And I couldn't agree more. It's been so tough with Zoom. And I get so excited when I walk in the office and see other people. And I guess I'm just curious, Kayne, because I'm sure all of our listeners want to know, are there any nuggets or things that they can do, right, to keep their employees engaged during this time that you found successful?
Oh man, I wish I had the magic thing to say, but I mean, I think, I guess a couple things, and I ask a lot of questions of local leaders too, of what they're doing. Like Amanda Lannert at Jellyvision has been great to her culture is, I always put in the highest regard. And, she does random happy hours and, trivia and all sorts of types of things over Zoom. And we do the same thing. I mean, and I think anything to keep the employees engaged. We had a really great virtual holiday, like kind of happy hour where we sent everybody from distillery. We sent them like a mixology kit, and we all made the same drink through the distillery. And we had non-alcoholic too for those that didn't drink. And it was great. I mean, it was fantastic. And it bridged that gap until we can figure out whatever this normalcy looks like. But I'll tell you what's interesting, and I think we're all going through this, is we're no longer hiring local, right? I mean, I think now, because I think we're always going to be in a hybrid situation, is we're hiring wherever we can get the best talent. So if that means I'm hiring a person in Phoenix and LA and Maine and wherever, so this is the norm for some sort. And I think we will go back to the office at some point, but we have to all adapt, and we have to figure out platforms that keep us connected. And I do think as a leader, you have to be every single day checking in whatever way you deem necessary. For me, it's a phone call, but I check in every day with 5, 10, 12 people. And I just think it's the best way to do it right now.
Yeah.
I think, a text, a Slack, and an email just doesn't do it.
Yeah.
So you touched on the subject of a visionary, right? People that people you've worked with, people who are really just kind of wired at that high rate of speed and just kind of have an askewed view of the world. What makes a great one? Because I think there's again, like you mentioned, like when you're 25, 26, aspirationally, I think most people are like, oh, I think I could be that role, but it's not really, I don't think it's a role you choose. And, I don't think it's something, as opposed to a leadership, which you said, and I agree, you constantly have to be building on. And the Dunning-Kruger effect is definitely there for most people of like, oh, I've got it nailed. And it's like, if you think you do, you really haven't even started. But from like a visionary standpoint, I do think some of that is just, I think about people who have dyslexia, and because of it, they've got a whole different perspective of the world and the way that they process information. And that unique opportunity, that unique differentiator really sets you on a different direction. So what makes a great visionary from your experience? We're seeing a lot of these organizations being built and grown.
Yeah. I can't say it's one thing. I think it really depends. I'll go back to using Brad as example. Is I've always found, and specifically with Brad, is how curious he is. He's made his wealth. He's done very, very well. He's got numerous publicly traded companies, but he's never stopped being curious. And not only just being curious, but going out and validating the idea. So it's one thing to be curious, but then it's go out and say, okay, I'm curious about this. Would this succeed? Would this fail? Let me try it, right? In certain circumstances, even the way Uptake was created, for all intents and purposes, was, meeting the CEO of Caterpillar and saying, what do you do with 13 million machines of data? And it goes Peoria, Illinois, and it sits and rots. And he's like, well, give me a locomotive and let me go figure out if I can predict failure. That's how Uptake was started in a nutshell. Like, that's visionary, right? Like that curious, being curious and saying, what do you do with data? Let me create a new business from that. There's the visionary. There's also, though, the visionary of, you don't have to necessarily be like that far reaching. In a lot of circumstances for me, because I'm product wired. I'm like a product guy at heart. And where my juices get flowing is when I'm in front of a customer. And when I'm in front of a customer is like, it's always for me, like it's the most exciting time of the year. And I try to see as many as I can. But when I'm in front of the customer, they say, I'm having this problem. I'm trying to solve this. We can't do that. And your mind's just racing 100 miles an hour, right? And then you got to come back and you got to validate it. And then you got to be able to sell it internally. And then you actually got to be able to build it and deliver it and everything else. And so that's for me, like for me personally, being a visionary is it's not just seeing forward thinking. It's also being able to take that and boil it down to something that the workforce can understand. And most importantly, the why. Like I've been out and I've seen 10 customers. I've seen this problem 10 times. We have a solution that could do this, but then how do you actually go do it? How do you build it? How do you deliver it? And that's typically the hard work. So there's visionaries that just have ideas, but nothing really actually comes from it. There's other visionaries where you see it, you build it, you deliver it, and it's actually it can be successful or it can be a failure. We've already discussed that. So, that's really what I sort of enjoy. And I guess like people that I surround myself with is I always have a very, very deep appreciation of it's not just the idea generation. It's how do you take the idea and really bring it to life.
Yeah, when we discussed this before, you had also mentioned, I think this is great, that a visionary is willing to hear no, right? They're curious. They're not in love with their idea enough that like they squelch open conversation, but they almost encourage it. It almost seems like everything seems to be a little bit of like a science experiment of like.
Oh, yeah. Especially, we're in the industrial analytics space, we're in the IoT space, and it's as greenfield as green can be, right? It's endless ideas. And we're approached every day with a new one. And you got to be able to say no. And I say no 10 times the time I say yes. And it's because we got to stay focused. And you gotta trust the plan, and you gotta trust the people around you that have empirical evidence and data and have talked to the right people, the customers, all the above, and to bring that back and say, okay, this is why we're doing it. And that's part of being a visionary as well. Is you're absolutely right. Is sometimes no is much better than saying yes.
So if somebody, you're talking to yourself, and some of this is luck, right? We fall into luck when it comes to 100%. Our careers, right?
100%.
And it's like, it's a blessing that you were there at eToys. And so for those who haven't gotten as lucky to, engage in so much failure as you have, what would you say to like somebody younger? Like, hey, how do you tell them like, hey, go do this? What would you say to a younger person who's, at a safe job, making good money? They're on that path of like, hey, here's predictable outcomes. What would you say to them?
So look, I don't think there's a right path and a wrong path. And if you think that you're just, you think the path is going to be straightforward, it will never, ever happen that way. And Rob Chesney, the former CEO of Trunk Club and at Chicago Ventures, he's a very good friend and been a mentor of mine over the years. And, he gave me this really fun analogy one time. And I was at Driven, and I was like, sort of, we get in those highs and lows. I was probably in a weird spot at the time. And I said, I was asking for advice. And he said, listen, you didn't go to Six Flags and hop on the merry-go-round. Like, that's pretty predictable, right? That's going to go the same direction. It's going to go at the same speed. And he's like, you're on like the X-Wing fighter, and that thing's going to drop you 300 feet out of the sky with 5 loops. And you're not going to know what hit you when you hit the ground, like when you get back down to the ground. And I was like, wow. And it really put it in perspective for me is this, for the younger generation, this is what I will say is when I became a database administrator in 91, my goal was to be a CIO. I want to carry a briefcase. I want to be in Philadelphia on the 34st floor of Second and Market. And I want to be a CIO and walk in every day and be like a chief information officer. I became a CIO probably 10 years later, and I hated every minute of it. Every single minute, I hated it because I wasn't I wasn't using the muscle that I was sort of born with, which was innovating and developing. I was actually like in a reactive mode, and I was like sort of keeping things moving and just in a really, really just boring environment. And so I reinvented myself to get out of that. And what I would tell the younger generation is, you think you know what you want to do, but explore every possibility to make sure that you're not stuck in that. And I've gone and tried sales, and I've gone and tried marketing. I've gone and tried product, and I've gone and tried every, other than maybe like just being like an accountant, like I've tried every single sort of business role to check box to say, what do I really like and what drives me personally? And what are things I actually really hate and I just don't want to do anymore, right? And I think you just have to stay open-minded, especially in the world we live in right now, and these opportunities are being created, is just stay very, very open-minded. And I would also say is you got to be curious, and you got to be adaptable to the way the world is changing, right? It's like, I go back to things that I was doing 2 years ago look very, very different right now. The way we operate a business, the way we communicate with employees, all of it looks very, very different than when you think of 2 years ago. And so I think learning, I think getting mentors, I think doing some things for free sometimes, like, just going out and saying, I want to learn this, and I know I'm not going to make $1 on it, but I'm super curious of the way this works. All of that, I think, is really, really important for development. But I think it's the most important thing I tell people is, I know you probably, maybe you have a dream to do this, but just stay open-minded along the way, because there might be something much bigger out there that you want to do or you should be doing.
I love that advice, Kayne, because you would probably agree that even though you tried many of those roles and may have hated some of them, it probably made you a better leader because you have more appreciation and understanding of what those folks do.
100%. And I'll give you a great example, a car. So I was one of 9 officers in a publicly traded company. I was president of Data as a Service. Company got acquired. I had a really, really big role within CAR. And we acquired a company in Canada, and it was very similar to Driven. And I loved what we were doing at Driven. Like, I just thought we were so far ahead of the curve, and it was so innovative. And I decided to go run sales for North America for this entity that we bought. And everybody, when I made the decision, everybody said, wait a minute, you're going to leave being an officer and you're going to go run North American sales for this entity? And I was like, yeah. And they were like, why would you do that? And I said, because A, I love what I did at Driven and be in front of the customer. B, I know the product. And C, this is what I think I was wired to do. And so I ran sales for about 18 months and loved it. Absolutely loved it. But if I had not done Driven, I would have never done that role. In a million years, I would have never signed up for that role. And sales and doing that for a year and a half, and traveling 200,000 miles. Now, when I talk to salespeople at Uptake, again, I have the appreciation for, hey, our product doesn't do this, this, and this. You're absolutely right. And I'm sorry that you're in the position and that you're trying to sell this. So getting with product and getting the features built, or doing whatever we have to do to make sure the sales team's happy. If I hadn't done sales, I don't think I'd have the appreciation for understanding what our sales team's going through day to day.
Mm-hmm.
That's great stuff. And I, as an engineer and then having to learn sales, there should be more appreciation for both sides, right?
100%.
It's a hard job.
Everybody should go through sales at some point in their life, because it's hard.
It is hard.
It's, here it is 0 every month, right? It's the clock restarts, the first of the month, and you're back to square one. And yeah, but yeah, I loved that 18 months.
Awesome. Hey, I think we could keep this going for another 9 days. But I honestly, I really want to just say how much I appreciate you spending your time to share your experience and your wisdom. It's really amazing stuff. Congratulations on all the success and all the failures.
Yeah.
You don't get one without the other.
You do not. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the conversation.
Our pleasure. We also want to thank our listeners. We really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us.
And if you'd like to receive new episodes as they're published, you can subscribe by visiting our website at dragonspears.com/podcast, or find us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode was sponsored by Dragon Spears and produced by Dante32.